So you want to build a custom subwoofer box for your vehicle, but maybe you don't have access to specialized tools like a table saw or a router. Not to worry, my friends, because when we combine some basic tools with some outside the box thinking, we can still build an awesome custom enclosure. In this video, I'm going to show you how we can use a circular saw, a drill, and a jigsaw, along with some special custom techniques to make do with what we have and create this cost-effective box build. Hey, what's going on? I'm Mark. Welcome to CarAudioFabrication. Here on this channel, I do car audio reviews and build log videos and tutorial videos like this video because I really believe in helping you guys build your own custom car audio system that you can use to truly experience the music rather than just hearing it. Let's get started with our first step. To get started, we need a plan for what our box is going to be. Now, I could honestly go on forever about how to design a sub box, but that's outside the scope of this video, but I'll leave some links for you guys down in the video description to help you out. Now, whether it's a ported or sealed box or some other design style, all of the techniques in this video are going to apply, and the first step that we need to do is start with cutting. We're going to be using this low-cost circular saw in order to make all the cuts for this box, and a lot of guys will just use this as is. I mean, it's a circular saw. It's designed to cut straight. But guys, we're better than that. We're gonna think smart. I have something really cheap that we can make that will make your cuts much better quality when using a circular saw. So all we need is a couple of straight strips of wood. You can buy any straight strip of wood at your hardware store. I have one long one here. 48 inches is a good length so that you can cut through the short side of a 48 by 96 inch piece of wood, and then we have another piece of the same wood that's cut down. On the shorter piece of wood, I'm going to use a square in order to draw a line that is perpendicular to the edge. In the meantime, I've drilled 3 screws into the long piece, and now all I have to do is line up the long piece with the short piece and sink the screws down into it to attach the two together. I clamp this assembly to a table, and then using the circular saw, I trim off each of the 2 ends of the T. So the reason for this makeshift T-square is we can easily lay out our cuts on a board, and what we can do is, since we cut this line of the T-square using our saw, we know this exact offset. But once we lay out a cut on our board that we're going to be cutting for the box, we can simply line up the edge of our makeshift T-square, and we know that that's where the blade is going to line up when we ride the saw along this edge to make a cut. Now, what cuts should we start with first? Well, guys, you want to look for your most common dimension on the layout of your box. So for this particular box here, you can see that we have a lot of boards that are the same width. They're the same dimension in this direction. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make that width cut first along this long board, and then I can easily cut multiple different pieces from that width. A lot of different hardware stores will actually have a big saw that they will cut down a sheet of wood for you, so you should request one of these common widths. That way you end up with a piece that basically has half of the cuts done already because you have all of your width cuts done. If you're a little confused, don't worry, it's gonna make sense once I start cutting everything. So to set up our cut, I've got my makeshift T-square lined up here. I've got a clamp down here, but how do we hold everything once we go to cut this with the circular saw? This is something that I don't think enough people take advantage of. Of course, you can use clamps like I have on that end, but I find that a lot of times clamps end up getting in the way, and clamps, honestly, you're gonna need a bunch of them to be able to do this, and they can get expensive. That's why I like to actually use template tape. This template tape is a double-sided sticky tape. Once we stick it on the surface, we can pull away the backing paper, and that will allow us to stick our T-square to the top surface there. I wanted to spend that time really explaining the setup because that's what's important and will get you the best results. And now that the board is cut to the main dimension, we can start cutting each of our pieces off of this board. Now, don't forget that a circular saw is also a versatile tool that we can use to cut angles. So if we're doing corner 45s or if we have a slanted face on the enclosure, we can take care of that by simply adjusting to the correct angle and then cutting. Now, also take into account that if we need to cut a side piece that has an angle on it, we can still use our makeshift T-square to line up exactly where our cuts will be. So I've got my front and my back pieces, my top and my bottom, and then my 2 side pieces. And now it's time to start doing some detail work. So we know that we're gonna need to cut out this subwoofer hole on the front piece here. And I also need to mount my terminal here on the back piece. So let's get to doing that. So to make the subwoofer cutout hole, I'm first going to find the exact center of this board. Now here's an example of thinking outside the box to make do with what you have. I'm using a piece of cardboard along with a push pin. On the cardboard, I carefully measure out half of the diameter of the subwoofer cutout hole, which is called the radius, and I mark this on the cardboard with 2 separate holes. I use one hole for the push pin to act as a center axis, and I use the other hole for the pencil lead so that I can just simply draw this circle. I also mark out a second hole that's slightly smaller than the outer dimension of the subwoofer so that I can cut the upholstery materials away later. This method also works great for marking out the hole for my speaker terminal. So to make these holes, I'm going to be using a jigsaw. I find that a jigsaw is a common tool that a lot of people have access to, and I actually made a recent video where I really go in depth on how you can get really good accurate results using this tool. You can check out that video here on screen, but the quick notes are to take your time with cutting and to make sure that you're using the right blade. Got the circle cut now. Now what I want to do is I want to show you guys something kind of different. So you can see I've drawn all these lines on the front, and that's because I want to make a cool design on the front. And I actually want to transition from carpet to vinyl to carpet to vinyl, 2 different colors of vinyl, carpet. You guys have already seen in the intro what this will turn out like. But what I want to do is I want to make a thin little cut into each of these lines so that I have a nice spot to cut the materials and transition them so they have a nice hard edge. So to do this, normally I would use something like a router, but I want to show you guys how we can do it with a cheap tool. So what I've done is I've set up the circular saw so that the blade is only, I gotta rotate it actually, it's so little, it's only sticking out just a little bit there. See that? So this is just a test cut, and it's a little bit wavy because I just did it freehand. I didn't have the straight edge on, but you can see we have a nice little groove, and that will give me somewhere to actually transition the carpet and vinyl. So again, I'm using my cost-effective T-square. I've got it lined up here with the edge of the line. I've got everything template taped together. Let's make this cut. Cut 1 is complete. I'm gonna have to do this quite a few more times. There we go, Fab family, check it out. Now, there's one more thing I need to do to the edges here. So I want the vinyl and carpet to transition around the sides as well. So to make a little groove, I'm gonna have to do this kind of by hand. I'm just going to use a file to make that groove. Like I said, sometimes you just gotta think outside the box and make do with what you have. Now before we get started on assembly, I'm using this 1/2-inch piece of material to draw this line, which will allow me to space the side pieces into the box during assembly. Now normally I like to use a brad nailer and a bunch of clamps to do the assembly process for a box, but I find that having a bunch of clamps on hand can get expensive pretty quick, and a brad nailer is kind of more of a specialty tool that a lot of people might not have. You can honestly get away with just using a drill, and we're going to be using screws. Now you could use the drill in order to sink the screws. I prefer using an impact driver like this. I'm going to be using both the drill and the impact driver, but again, you could get away with just using the drill. Now what's important to do though is with the drill, we're going to be using this small drill bit in order to pre-drill. Pre-drilling each hole before we sink the screw will make sure that our wood doesn't split. I apply wood glue to the edge of the board, and we want to make sure that we get 100% coverage, so I spread it out using my finger. Here you can see where I line up the edge of the board to that line that I just made a minute ago. For each fastening location, we're going to start with drilling that wood, and then we're going to follow up with a good screw. We repeat this process several times on the enclosure, attaching each additional side. I also like to add a little bit of wood glue into the corners and then smooth it out using my finger. Now you can only get away with doing this if your cuts are good and straight. If they're a little bit more jagged, you'll want to use something like caulk in order to seal it up. Once we attach the final side of the enclosure, we want to make sure that we seal those corners as well by accessing them through the sub cutout. Construction's complete, so now we can move on to the upholstery stage of this project. To stick the carpet and the vinyl that we're going to be using to the box, we're going to use contact adhesive. Normally it's best to shoot this using a spray gun, but we're going to use a nice cost-effective brush. Now, one thing that I do recommend that you splurge on is a good high quality adhesive. There's nothing worse than having upholstery peel off a project that you've put a ton of time into. Now, since this adhesive is a contact adhesive, we want to make sure that it's dry to the touch before we attach the two surfaces together. Since it is, we can smooth the carpet on, and keep in mind that it doesn't take much pressure at all to lock this adhesive in place, so be careful where you push down. Now, for the detail work here on the front, I'm going to start with something with a hard edge and pushing it down into those lines that we cut using the saw earlier. Next, I use a pair of scissors and cut the excess material up to that line. I then cut within the groove using a razor blade. Doing these steps allows me to remove the carpet from the parts of the box that I don't want it. So I repeat this several times. So what can we do with these exposed areas? Well, we're going to use upholstery vinyl, and I've picked out these two accenting colors that I'm going to use. Just like the carpet, I'm going to apply the adhesive and then allow it to dry. Cut the material into strips and stick it in place. Next, I use the knife to carefully trim it and remove the excess material. This process is repeated with each of the colors. Now remember how I inset the side pieces of the box? I did this so that I could fold the material around the edge and then use that hard corner as a guide for my knife blade. This makes it so I can just remove the excess material and we have a nice clean transition. For the corner where the carpet pieces come together, I press the carpet layers together and then I use a sharp pair of scissors in order to trim the seam. Then I need to trim the carpet for the terminal as well as the subwoofer, and finally on the side pieces I again use that hard corner edge in order to carpet the sides of the box. Now I need to install the wiring in the subwoofer, but while we do that, I just want to remind you guys one of the big reasons I decided to make this video was because so many of you were asking for it. So it's really important that if you guys have something you want to see, post it up in a comment down below. Remember that even with these basic tools, we can really accomplish a lot if we think outside the box. And also, guys, remember that everyone starts somewhere. Some of the best car audio builders I know all started just using these simple tools. So in a second here, we will see the finished box. I plan to do a little bit of test bumping on this box in another video, so if you'd like to see that video along with my future videos, I would love to have you as a subscriber. Now, if you're one of my subscribers already, don't forget that you can help crowdfund the making of this content by joining the Patreon support team. Check it out here on screen, and a special thanks goes out to John, Brian, Ali, Steven, Jerry, EJ, Emmanuel, Truman, James, and Colin, and the rest of the Patreon support team. Thank you everyone for watching.